All right, let's dive right in. We're going to talk about a massive 9th century clash, one that didn't just decide the fate of a king, but literally defined the future of an entire nation. So just imagine for a second a map of Europe, and by the late 800s, the Viking influence is just bleeding all over it. For decades, this tide of raiders, traders, and settlers from Scandinavia had been sweeping across the known world. We're talking from the icy rivers of Russia all the way to the coasts of North America. They had built this massive and, frankly, pretty terrifying presence. So how do you stop a force like that? I mean, this seemingly unstoppable wave of conquest. Well, the answer isn't some giant empire or a huge alliance of nations. Nope, it all comes down to one single, desperate battle fought on a muddy hillside in England. But to really get why that battle was so important, we've got to back up a little and talk about the invaders themselves. I mean, who were these Vikings really? We have this pop culture image of Vikings, right? Horned helmets, just pure raiders. But the reality is way more complex. They were an agricultural society. Farmers, families. Coming from Scandinavia, a place with really tough terrain, the sea became their highway. And that whole raiding thing, it's fascinating. To them, it wasn't just stealing. It was seen as an honorable challenge. The thinking was, if you can't protect your stuff, well, maybe you don't deserve to keep it. And the key to their entire operation, their secret weapon really, was a piece of incredible technology, the longship. These things were engineering marvels. Check this out. They had such a shallow draft, they could float in just a few feet of water. That meant they could sail right up rivers, deep, deep into enemy territory. They could hit places that everyone else thought were completely safe, far from the sea. It was a total game changer. Okay, so let's shift our focus to England, because by the year 878, this Viking onslaught had pushed the island right to the edge. I mean, it was on the absolute brink of total collapse. You see, this massive force, what the Anglo-Saxons called the Great Heathen Army, had landed more than 10 years earlier, and they just started taking the English kingdoms apart one by one. Northumbria? Gone. East Anglia? Conquered. Mercia? It fell too. By the time we get to 878, there is only one single Anglo-Saxon kingdom left standing, Wessex. And all that stood in the way of total Viking domination was one man and his army, King Alfred of Wessex. And you gotta understand, he wasn't just fighting for his throne. He was fighting for everything, the survival of his people, their language, their religion, their entire culture. All of it was on the line against what looked like an unstoppable force. So all of this, it all comes to a head in one single decisive moment. The Battle of Edington, which went down sometime in May of 878. So Alfred had actually been driven into hiding, living in the marshes, but he emerges from the shadows and rallies his troops from all over the countryside. And his whole strategy is pure old-school Saxon warfare, the shield wall. Picture it, a dense, interlocking wall of shields and spears. And for an entire day, the Viking army, led by a guy named Guthrum, just smashes against it. The Vikings were all about shock and awe, these ferocious charges designed to break the enemy line and cause chaos. But it just didn't work. Against the solid, unyielding discipline of the Saxons, they failed. The wall held. And after hours of this, beaten and exhausted, the Vikings finally broke and fled to their fortress. But Alfred wasn't done. He followed them and laid siege for 2 whole weeks. So what you're seeing here is more than just a battle, right? It's a total clash of military styles. You've got the Saxon strategy, collective discipline, this defensive brick wall that's almost impossible to break. And then you've got the Viking way, pure aggressive offense, all about individual skill and shock tactics designed to just shatter the enemy. But to really feel the brutality of a fight like this, we need to zoom in. Let's go from the big battle lines right down to the individual warrior and look at the weapons they were actually using. This quote here from an old collection of Norse poems, it kind of says it all. Let a man never stir on his road a step without his weapons of war. Basically, it's the core of the Viking mindset. Always be ready. Every single Viking was expected to be armed all the time, because you just never knew when a fight or an opportunity was going to pop up. And if one weapon perfectly captures that idea, it's this, the sex. It's this big, single-bladed knife that pretty much every Viking carried. Think of it as a multi-tool. It was a utility knife, a status symbol, and when you're smashed together in a shield wall, it was a terrifyingly effective sidearm. Yeah, and don't picture some delicate little dagger. This thing evolved from heavy farming and hunting tools. It was a beefy, sturdy hacking weapon. The sheer weight of it alone could break bones or cause serious internal damage right through armor. In the tight, brutal crush of close quarters combat, it was just vicious. But here's the amazing thing. These were not crude tools. Viking blacksmiths were absolute masters. They used this really advanced technique called pattern welding, where they'd fold and hammer together different types of iron and steel. The result was a blade that wasn't just super strong and flexible. It was also a work of art, with these beautiful swirling patterns inside the metal. So let's pull back out. Alfred's victory at Edington won because of that unbreakable shield wall. It did so much more than just win one battle. It literally changed the entire course of English history. So, after being defeated on the battlefield and then starved out for 2 weeks, the Viking leader Guthrum finally surrendered. And the terms Alfred offered were, well, they were pretty remarkable. Guthrum had to get baptized as a Christian, with Alfred as his godfather, no less. In return, he and his men were actually given a huge chunk of territory in the north and east of England. This area would become famous as the Danelaw. 100. 100 years. That's how long this victory secured Wessex's position as the top Anglo-Saxon kingdom. It created a whole century of stability, a foundation from which a single, unified England could finally start to grow. Look, Edington was the turning point. There's no other way to put it. It was the moment the Viking tide didn't just stop, it actually started to roll back. This one battle saved the last Anglo-Saxon kingdom from being wiped out and laid the groundwork for what would, generations down the line, become the nation of England. So it really makes you wonder, right? What if that shield wall had broken? What if that line of Saxon soldiers had buckled under the sheer ferocity of the Viking charge? You can argue that in that single moment, that display of discipline and grit, a kingdom was saved. And because it was saved, the very idea of England was given a chance to exist.